Wanted to break down the volatility index, the VIX. Specifically, I put a trade on VIXY VIXY stock. There are some ETFs versus the volatility index, UVXY, VXX, and a few others. I want to break down those, show you what is happening with the VIX, and why stepping in and selling some calls against VIXY may be a profitable venture. I already took some profits on a small position I entered back on Friday with today's move. But what comes next with the VIX and VIXY stock? Let's jump in. I am an options trader. That's one of my preferred weapons when it comes to trading the stock market itself. So I live and breathe by watching what's going to happen with the VIX, the volatility index versus the S&P 500. And I put a trade on last Friday going into this week. There was a big pop higher going in through yesterday on the VIX. And I put the trade on VIXY, VIXY stock, which is one of the ETFs. I got four that I'm going to be looking at, 3 or 4 in this video. Versus those ETFs are versus the VIX itself. Now, one of the two things that you need to understand about these ETFs, they're not something you necessarily want to buy and hold for a really long time. They just sort of erode in value more and more and more for two reasons. Number one, they are based on the next 2 months, month 1 and month 2, versus the spot, which the VIX you're looking at here in this chart is the spot right now. So there's inflation and other variables involved in why you see VIXY stock sort of eroding perpetually. The second thing is the people who are running that show want their scratch. It's a little bit of money, a small percentage of 1% versus the total assets under management, and it continually draws down that. So the stock price just continually draws down based on redemptions like that from management, but also the inflation factor. So we're looking at the VIX itself. I put this trade on knowing that that we would see a pretty hot number this morning with inflation. Now, I did a video on the stock market today and I broke down inflation numbers, but basically inflation's coming in too hot. And the reason why inflation's coming in too hot is because the consumer is really starting to ramp back upward. Housing is moving upward. We saw a kind of a sizable increase in housing, which drove inflation. And I felt like this was a very high likelihood, and I put a trade on some bond ETFs as well, the volatility index. But if you look at the volatility index back last week, it was very, very low. And I felt that it was an easy trade for me to put on. I bought some calls, selling some puts, brought in a little bit of premium. I had to do a ratio, buying 1 call, selling 2 puts, simply because there was no one underneath. Everybody kind of felt the same way, and no one was bidding up those puts. Yesterday, I noticed something. Actually, the VIX popped higher. This is the S&P 500. There was a small sell-off. If you look right after, so on my clock here, I'm in Mountain Time, United States. Noon here is 2 o'clock New York. Just past there was a sell-off in the market. People started buying puts on the stock market. And of course, this morning's number on inflation really pushed the stock market lower. But let's take a look at the put-call ratio. Now, to understand the kind of the concept of the math here, 2 things. First off, looking at the put-call ratio, yesterday the put-call ratio spiked up to 1.6. All right, so let's say there's a ratio of 1 to 1 or a 1.00 ratio, puts to calls. And the value of, say, 1 million puts and 1 million calls is $1 each. Well, if the ratio pushes higher, up to 1.6, there's more puts being purchased at any one particular time. So this actually expands the total number there, which would spike up VIX. That's what we saw yesterday. But if you look today, despite the fact that we've seen a big move lower, the put call ratio is moving back downward, down to, it might finish up right around 0.85. Guys like me took profits on, I took 50% of my profits yesterday thinking, wow, that was quick. The number's not even here. I'm sitting on some profits. Let me go ahead and take a little bit of this. Clearing out 50%, and I made some money on that. Then, of course, today, the stock market moving lower, the VIX popping higher. The individual puts, the value of those themselves, even though the ratio went down, the value expanded, pushing the VIX higher. So you kind of have to understand that mathematics when you see it. But here, the bar chart on here is the volatility index versus VIX, VIXY, UVXY, and VXX. These are all ETFs versus the VIX itself. VIX shooting up higher. VIXY is the one that I sold the puts on and buying the calls on. And that one is actually the orange one. You can't really see it at all, actually, because they're sort of right on top of each other. The orange and yellow bars are about the same. This was a pretty decent little move higher, but I think it's over with. If the put call ratio settles down and the S&P 500 turns right back upward, because after all, with inflation, despite inflation, with the bond yields where they are, this economy is moving forward. So tomorrow, things are likely to have settled down with the S&P 500. I'm actually sitting there saying maybe I should sell those calls versus VIXY stock. But I think I'm going to wait until Thursday. I finished up. I got out of that the rest of the position today. I took 50% of the profits yesterday. But going into Thursday, I'm very likely to sell calls against VIXY again, simply because I think with the put call ratio settling back down, I think the S&P 500 is going to mellow out and maybe start moving right back upward. There's still a lot of value there. As long as the Federal Reserve doesn't start saying we're raising interest rates, the stock market might turn right back around and head right back upward. So if I sold calls against VIXY stock, they expire worthless. So we'll see a big spike. I sell into that. I make a few bucks. I break down. I haven't actually done a video on the VIX itself for a while because the VIX has been kind of boring. But there's still money there. I'll still step in and I'll sell some puts from time to time when things mellow out. But I don't get much money, but it's free money. I'll take it. Nonetheless, if this is the kind of breakdown you're looking for videos, for content like this, breaking down, say, the VIX and VIXY, UVXY, VXX, those stocks, make sure to hit that like and follow button. We'll see you in the next video.